a very safe and a very comfortable zone for everyone to share their thoughts, views, perspective, and even if those are not comfortably shared in your working settings, here this is the time and place where you can speak openly and candidly, and so shall I. So without any further ado, so I do have my deck up and running. Do I share it? Do you guys see my, I guess I need to stop sharing and start sharing again. So you see my screen number 2, that's screen number 2. Tell me if you see your own logo.
It's there.
Yeah, cool. So, okay, so I won't say too much about myself. I think Jay did the needed. I'm just gonna say, in the, I guess I don't want to call it a high echelon, but we have guide level folks that have been helping to move along Scrum Align's vision and mission of transforming the world of work. I'm one of enterprise and team coaches with Scrum Alliance. This is one dimension of my what I would consider my personal accreditation, if that's worth anything. But the other one, of course, very complementary to the first one, is I'm a certified LeSS trainer. In fact, I never tried to pursue becoming a trainer until the last few years. I have been coaching and living through LeSS principles and experiments for many years, probably for the last decade or so. And only recently I decided, okay, I would like to become a trainer. I have been working with many companies and being deeply embedded with those companies. I live through LeSS and I teach and coach them LeSS, but training has never been my main goal, because becoming a trainer effectively means you end up traveling a lot. So, I wasn't much of a traveler, especially living in New York City. I try to do as much work as I could here locally. Anyway, that being said, enough about me. I try to be very transparent, and just like Jay and then John and others, I try to service the industry a lot in a non-for-profit, philanthropic way. I run a few large meetups local here in New York City as well as globally. I try to contribute here in the States as well as in Europe and in South America. So I take this twofold, being a coach, an organizational design consultant also requires doing a lot of things in the open space. And in fact, some of my best learning came from learning space, from the open space, because this is where you get to communicate with people like yourself in a very uninhibited, very safe way, without worrying about, tripping the wire or hitting the, some red tape organizationally. Okay. Next, I was going to give you a quick permission disclaimer. So I got these 2 links. So I'm going to share the deck with Jay afterwards, and once it's PDF'd, you're going to have these as hyperlinks. You can jump to those hyperlinks, and my deck is really very light. It's not like a large consultancy deck that has font size 6 pixel, and you can read it without a parser. Mine is very different. It's mostly cartoons and images, and I'm giving you full permission to use them with very small attribution to where they came from. So you will find some of them in this deck, but also many more if you follow the 2 links above. Okay, so I just want to say this right off the bat. And before I forget, of course, I just want to share with you, because everyone lives virtual lives now, I took some of my training online, and I teach weekly large-scale Scrum. These are daily events that are split into multiple days, so perhaps your network might be interested. I will share some of those specific events that are coming up at the end, and also that will be shared through Jay. Okay. So let me say something. It's like an opening statement I would like to start with. and I'm sure it will generate hopefully some questions and maybe even some aha moments. And by the way, I do want this to make it very informal. Please raise your hand, or literally, we don't have that many people in the queue. So please interrupt me if you have something pressing that you would like me to answer, or ping in the chat room. I don't monitor the chat room, but maybe Jay, if you see or see something, just stop and get my attention to it, okay?
Yeah, so I'll be monitoring. I sent a note to everyone. If you have a question, just send it to the chat room or raise your hand, and then we'll go from there.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. So let me make this statement. This is probably not always obvious, but I want to frame organizational agility in a very specific way. I want to say this. So organizational structure, not anything else, is the first order factor or system variable that has impact on everything else inside the ecosystem. If your organization is an ecosystem, then anything that has any sort of upstream to downstream impact on anything else would be considered like a system variable. So there are two types of relationships we usually talk about in large scale Scrum. In fact, we want to make sure people understand the difference between the two, but we primarily focus on and are interested in the latter. So one is correlation, and another one is causation. So we don't care so much about the correlation to independent events that happened ad hoc and don't have much impact on one another. That's a correlation. Like it's a beautiful weather in New York City today, and the stock market is open. And unfortunately, there is no correlation between the two. Causation would be something like it is raining heavily for the last 3 days, and our East River is going to flood or is going to raise its level. That will be a causation. So we care about causations, not so much about correlations. Now, going back to the point I was trying to make, the structure or organizational design or organizational structure is the first order factor. Everything else that just follows, behaviors, norms, values, principles, policies, let alone tools or any other things that are very, very, very rudimentary and very, very tactical. It is unfortunate that not everyone, at least not in my experience when I go to an organization, not everyone coach or a person who is accountable and responsible for improving organizational agility understands this. And we oftentimes see people focusing on variables that are of third degree, second, third degree variables, or secondary, tertiary variables, like trying to change organizational culture, let alone norms, values, principles, without actually touching the organizational structure. It is somewhere naive. It's almost like trying to chase a superficial indicator or superficial. I like use an analogy from medicine. It's like you have irritation on your skin, and you're trying to apply. You keep applying a cream. You keep applying and applying a cream, but really the root cause is very systemic. Maybe it's something about your diet. Maybe it's an allergy that you should just, maybe you could control it by controlling your diet as opposed to applying a cream. So that's the thing that we're trying to go after. We're trying to go after systemic root causes. And therefore, we stress that organizational design or organizational structure is that first degree variable that is important. So I'm going to steal this quote from Craig Larman. He actually wrote on the Scrum Alliance website back in 2015. There was a nice article. I think the Scrum Alliance lost it after they moved around their content and renovated the site. Maybe it's somewhere else, I'm not sure. But this is effectively what Craig is referring to, that when he talks about organizational agility. And by the way, I need to maybe step back and give you a bit of a history about about the word agile. I learned it the second hand also, but interesting. I'm going to remind to myself in a few minutes. So agility can really be achieved just by concentrating on technology alone. And as I'm sure you know this, and I'm sure it's almost like a cliche if I were to say, oh, Agile is not just about IT. Yeah, we all say this. Everyone says this. But what does it really mean? And how far are we willing to go to address organizational malfunctions or dysfunctions or pitfalls in order to improve agility? And we probably need to go as far as legal practices, product development for sure, HR policies, site strategies, vendor management, sales, procurement, all those chevrons, all those dimensions of the organization, of an organizational structure are critical. I actually refer to this as a sushi roll. If you like sushi, you know, the best taste you can get out of sushi if you cut it across that sushi and eat the whole thing, as opposed to just eating the layer of seaweed or rice. Just like we refer to in Scrum, we user stories have to be sliced vertically through all horizontal components. Yes, I actually apply the same exact concept when I talk about organizational structure. You have to cut across multiple organizational domains to get the true flavor, to get the true, you know, essence of the organization. Right. So before I actually go to the next slide, I wanted to say something else about the word agility. I'm not sure. This is something that I was told. This is the history that happened back in 2001 in Snowbird, Utah, when the 17 fine gentlemen got together to come up with the Agile Manifesto as we know it today. And one of the words that came up there as a candidate to be used was the word adaptive. And I don't want to paraphrase exactly what I was told about the reason why the word adaptive was not used as we know it today. And we use the word agile. The word agile was used instead. And as we know, the word agile probably is not obvious to many. It's an English word, but for a layman person, unless someone came from game athletics or from maybe like from military background, to them the word agile may not be too obvious. And on the other hand, the word adaptive that was originally meant is much more of a layman term. So I always recommend people, look, if you are questioning whether the word agile means what it should mean, try to substitute it with the word adaptive. These are two synonymous words, and if the meaning remains, if the meaning is preserved, that means the original use of the word agile was right. And if the meaning is completely lost, something did not go well, right? That's why we have so many instances of people misusing the word agile. And of course, this litmus test comes very handy from time to time. Okay. So I shared with Jay a few weeks back the desired content for today's discussion. And I thought the three key adoption principles of LeSS would need to be covered in more detail. This is like the first thing I would like to share with the crowd. Of course, I don't have good view into who has, you know, how much exposure you've had to LeSS principles and rules and guides and experiments. So I'm assuming that maybe it's good to normalize with everyone. So there are three key principles in LeSS adoption. First, so obviously you can read it for yourself. It's deep and narrow versus broad and shallow, top down versus bottom up. And the third one is using volunteering. So first, I'm going to say is this. Deep and narrow applies to something that is pretty, you know, maybe not obvious to everyone, but we don't want LeSS adoptions to be very wide and very very I'm calling the word bombastic is probably not the right word. We don't want LeSS adoptions to become so magnificent that we can bite more than we can swallow. So therefore, we really want LeSS adoptions to be relatively narrow, very relatively concise in width, but at the same time pretty deep. And if you remember from the previous slide, when we talk about various organizational structures that are involved in less adoptions, that need to be involved in less adoptions. This kind of should make sense. We go very deep within the organizational within the organizational structure, cutting through multiple organizational domains, as opposed to just doing some superficial improvements, but at the very narrow scale. So in other words, my next slide is going to show this. So you probably are familiar with organizations liking to apply these large, out-of-the-box, popular, very commercially successful, I must say, frameworks and scaling solutions. It's literally you unpack and you install it, and it pretty much challenges nothing of your organizational design. Almost every role with existing responsibility seamlessly folds into the framework, and you come back in a half a year and it's pretty much same people are doing almost same things but with different titles. It actually reminds me of the very popular movie back like I think at least a decade ago, The Casino, with Robert De Niro and I think it was Joe Pesci, right? So there was a moment there when the character was named Sam. I forget his last name. Robert De Niro was the actor, and he was trying to apply for the license of a casino manager. And because he had a track record, criminal record, he wouldn't be allowed to have the role. But he could be anywhere from a beverage manager to the manager of the facilities, et cetera, et cetera. And the attorney said to him, look, you don't have to be officially the casino manager. All you have to do is you have to apply for the license of let's just say a beverage manager. And it takes almost 6-7 months for them to approve it, the Nevada State Committee, Gambling Committee. By the time they get to the application, you will withdraw it and you will submit another one. So it's almost like and meanwhile, you will remain as the casino manager. So it kind of reminds me when I talk about large installation and large frameworks, it reminds me of that movie, because you pretty much have same people doing same things they have been doing for almost their entire lives, but just by changing their titles, you can you can help them exist and be also locally optimized. So that's deeper and narrow versus broad and shallow. Another big concept, another big principle of LeSS is top down and bottom up. So we want dual approach to exist in less adoptions. We want senior managers to be very supportive of our effort, but we want to do this not in spirit, but we want to do this actually in action. We refer to the action as going and seeing, go do gemba. Or in Japanese, it's called genshu genbutsu. So we do spend quite a bit of time with senior managers, getting them involved, educating them up front. It requires coaching, training, taking them through workshops, having external adoption experts, people that actually have done this in the past, spending enough time with them in ways that could be probably not very conducive of coexistence for people that actually work for companies, because it's always a question of safety and comfort zone. What can you or what can you not say to an organizational person or to an organizational manager? So we do spend a lot of time with senior managers educating them. And what we very much want to get from them is called an informed consent. An informed consent that they are very conscious in their decisions that they want to go through with agile transformations, agile adoption, the word transformation is not a good word. I don't like the word transformation because, by the way, it's also overloaded, just like the word agile. So the reason why we need to get their buy-in is because some of the organizational design implications that we require to see, require in large-scale Scrum need to have not just spiritual, but in action support by senior management as well as execution. We talk, and what exactly am I referring to? I'm referring to career path. I'm referring to motivation and incentives. I'm referring to organizational structure and reporting lines. I'm reporting to roles and responsibilities. I'm reporting to career path. I'm reporting to various things that are not simple and are pretty systemic and require organizational management, senior organizational people being involved and supporting it in actions. What also comes to mind is what's called the Toyota production system principle. If there is something happening down on the factory floor, the assembly line is stopped with a red button. Any assembly worker could do this, and then all senior managers jump out of their chairs and they come down to the factory floor and they see what is the problem, and until they discover what the problem is, they don't restart the assembly line. So the same concept we want to apply in LeSS. We want senior managers to be very willing and ready, very much willing and ready to step out of their comfort zones, out of their offices, and actually come down and meet with people. So that's top down. The bottom up also is pretty important here, because we can have all of the senior manager support from up above, but if we don't spend enough time with individuals and teams, people that will be actually involved in LeSS adoption, we're done only 50%. And we, as LeSS coaches and LeSS adoption experts, we spend plenty of time with individuals and teams at the ground level. On average, and also speaking from my own experience, prep time to get your organizational structure up to speed and be prepared for LeSS adoption takes about 2, maybe sometimes 3 months, after which time you flip a switch and voila, up to X number of teams, up to 8 teams start sprinting together. That's what we recommend, unless there's between 2 and 8 teams involved in LeSS sprint. So, and more to say on that front, what exactly that we do with individuals and teams, of course. And last but not least, and the last principle of large-scale Scrum is by volunteering. Now, volunteering is expected at various levels. We since large-scale Scrum is used to develop products, the first level of volunteering, if you will, is when we select the right product to be used with LeSS adoption. It isn't by an enforcement. It's not by mandate and prescription. We spend actually that ramp up time, 2 to 3 months of ramp up time. We spend plenty of time with product people, with business people, with senior management, trying to identify a product that they would like to be supporting and developing by using LeSS. Now, we also use volunteering to allow people leave LeSS product group if they don't wish to be a part of the experiment, or join if they actually are willing to be a part of the experiment, but today they are not a part of LeSS product group by the way their organization, by the way they are aligned within the organization. So we use volunteering at this level as well. We then use a volunteering principle when we build LeSS teams. Within LeSS, we have up to 8 teams, and we form them by self-formation. Now, we have team blueprint available for teams to rely on, but the actual process of who is going to be working with whom is really it's really by self-discovery and self-management. Like, for instance, we have so many people here in the queue today ad hoc. I could say, well, Tim and Olive and John and Ming should be in the same team, but that's not my thing to say. Once everyone in the queue understands what it means to structure a cross-functional, cross-component team, once they have a blueprint, then the entire community will self-organize and form a bunch of teams that will be supportive of LeSS product work. And again, this is one of the things we do as a prep step before flipping switch to LeSS sprinting. So those are the 3 key principles. And my next graphic, I think, kind of speaks, kind of re-emphasizes what what I just covered. Like for instance, I would expect less adoptions not be what you see on your left-hand side. This would be an example of a typical, unfortunately, broad and shallow agile transformation. And I put quotes, quote unquote, because oftentimes we see companies focus just on that. Best practices and cookbooks, processes, tools, operating models, metrics, reporting, KPIs, stuff that is not so much not important. It isn't as important as things on the right-hand side. It's almost like an Agile manifesto itself. We don't say no to documentation. We just say that working software is more important than documentation. We can create minimal documentation as needed. We don't say no to contract negotiation. Yeah, there could be instances where you need to have, actually, if there are external contracts with third parties, we absolutely need to have contracts. But we do want to stress that it's customer collaboration between technology and IT that's more important than contract negotiation. Same thing here. We don't say no to metrics. We don't say no to reporting. We don't say no to KPIs. Of course, those are, could be pretty useful. Velocity and output could be also a very useful thing, as long as they come from right people and they come for right reason, right? But clearly, these are not first degree of importance. And companies that are focused on these usually go very shallow in their adaptions. Let's forget about less funded. Any agile transformation that is focused on these things will most likely either stall or will start, falsifying their claims of success very, very, very soon, and will probably, decrease in intensity and excitement about what they do in the next few months, or maybe it will take maybe a few years, but it really doesn't bring any meaningful, long-lasting, sustainable results. And some of the bubbles that you see here is typically what we hear and see people exhibit. On the flip side, with less adoption, and this is something that we just covered in a previous slide, they're much narrower, but much, much deeper, and they're top down and bottom up. And things that you see on the far right, these are the dimensions that are very important in LeSS, and we have to focus on those. And depending who we are referring to, whether it's senior management or volunteer workers, and of course, when I mean by volunteering, it doesn't mean they work for free. Now, of course, these are well-paid people. It's just by volunteer. But what I mean by volunteering is that people join LeSS construct, LeSS or product group by volunteering. You cannot force people into LeSS, just like you cannot force people into Scrum, as a matter of fact. Okay. So those are pretty important things, right? And of course, with less adoptions, we want to stay on the right-hand side. Another thing I was going to unpack and uncover, and hopefully this will be perceived the right way, is some of the fallacies and dysfunctions we have out there about Agile expertise and Agile coaching expertise, specifically when it comes to the way organizations are implementing and supporting the role. So, and as I mentioned, I other than my paid work, I like spending time creating cartoons and some ironic, facetious diagrams. I like talking through those, and actually, these are pretty heavily loaded. So I have a story to tell behind each one of these. Like for instance, I'm gonna start with the right-hand side for now, because this is very much in line with what we expect in large-scale Scrum. In fact, there is a very, pretty well-known publication on InfoQ. I wrote it a few years back, and I based it on research and collaboration with another half a dozen of large-scale Scrum trainers that are, pretty versed and pretty knowledgeable on the subject. When we built LeSS product group, when we adopt LeSS, obviously we may need to rely on a senior expertise of an expertise of senior coaches and people that are specifically experienced with LeSS adoptions. Now, you can actually consider these coaches, but also very seasoned Scrum Masters. In large-scale Scrum, as a matter of fact, this is just one of the things I'm going to mention. A Scrum Master is not a fly-by night or weekend hobby role. In large-scale Scrum, a Scrum Master is a full-time role that is very senior, very important, and does not go away over time. A Scrum Master's focus may change from product ownership and teams onto organizational design and agile engineering practices, but that's just a matter of changing focus. One goes down, another one goes up, but the role always persists, always lives on, and it's a very senior role. Why am I making this side note? Is because a Scrum Master class is a team level coach who is very experienced, very well versed, very seasoned. So consider this either as a coach or as a Scrum Master. But notice something that's pretty critical here, right? This dotted line, this dotted circle implies that all of these guys are very much on par with one another. There is no hierarchy. These are very senior, very seasoned individuals, very experienced people that work together as a community. And of course, they have direct catwalk to senior management and people that are in charge of organizational decisions. This is important to understand that unless we don't have a centralized coaching function, the power tower of remote flyby, we call them not one night stand coaches that just come through, pepper with best practices and leave. And we see many organizations that apply this approach, that use this approach by taking their existing organizational domains, right? It could be a PMO tower or some other center of excellence of something else other than Agile, just relabeling them into Agile center of excellence now, and off you go. Same exact people with the same exact life experience and aspirations are now calling themselves coaches. And that's how we end up with RAGs and maturity metrics and best practices and tons of wiki pages and very little interaction with actual team, with real teams. So, of course, this is a dysfunction we see quite a bit. And this is the dysfunction is very often seen within organizations that like to unpack and install these large frameworks, because that's how it all perpetuates itself, right? You have a large consultancy coming in, they recommend a large framework. It comes with a bunch of, with a handful of senior consultants, high-paid consultants, and they create this centralized power tower, and now they tell teams how to self-organize. Obviously, very dysfunctional. Another cartoon, I'm going to just probably spend very little time on this, but just to say, if you want to have any organizational success with agility, specifically with less adoption, you want to steer away from guides that are marked in red on my right-hand side. You probably want to look for people that are in blue, people that are deeply ingrained in the industry for many years, supporting each other, learning, continuous learners that take a long time, to take very seriously their career path. So you don't want fast trackers on the right-hand side that jump from one role onto another, because they perceive it as the fast track to to advance their career without really having not much to offer to their own organization. Okay, so they're just to be mindful of this. And of course, many companies have agile identity transformation centers where it's almost like going through a few very short steps, and once you get your accreditation and once you enter the Stargate, now you become a coach. And this is in fact very much in line with the law number 4, Larman's law number 4. You probably have seen those 5 laws of organizational behavior that talk about mid-level, first-level management being locally optimized to protect their own status quo, and rejecting anything that has the word agile in it, calling it purist and dogmatic. And that actually leads to many managers becoming relabeling themselves into agile trainers and coaches, just accentuating and amplifying the dysfunction. So of course, this is not a way to get certified and get improved. and learn from, this is not the way to advance your own career as a coach. This is not digressing on a tangent. Actually, this is actually very much in line with what I would consider as one of the key aspects of less adoption, because unless you secure not only ambitious people, you definitely want people with ambition, but you want to secure people with deep expertise and track record. Unless you have that in your respective place, you may have serious challenges with less adoption, because you will start. In fact, we actually have some field experience, field reports, field experience reports from less trainers, where companies ask them to change less teaching to fit their respective organizational uniqueness. And of course, we want people to own their decisions as opposed to renting from us. But changing what less teaches at hello implies that people are really not willing to challenge anything that is probably dysfunctional and challenging today. Okay. This is the law I was referring to, the fourth number at the fourth down. Changing your own title into your title plus Agile manager or Agile single function specialist does not really make you a true Agile coach or an Agilist. And this is something actually I also I like to stress in for any organization. In order for you to be able to adopt less successfully, you need to go deep. And you need to touch some of the organizational dimensions that are not very popular. And what I mean by it is the following. In order for you to support the role of a Scrum Master in less, and as I mentioned, this is a full-time, very important role. You need to make sure that a person, whoever person that takes on this responsibility, feels supported, comfortable, ambitious, excited, and energized. Use all of the positive adjectives. For that, there should be an ecosystem created, and lots of it depends on HR policies and norms and disciplines. And the reason, it's my long way of saying, you have to create a career path. You have to create a habitat. You have to create an environment where these very new to organizations Agile roles are actually not just supported in spirit, but supported in real actions. And those, I'm sure many of you probably can read this simple SQL statement, but what is not sufficient, and what we certainly do not recommend organizations to do, is to just go through their HR database tables and substitute old titles with new titles depending on the pay grade. I've seen this more often than not. Someone who is a senior project manager, well, they want to change their career. Obviously, hey, we're changing, we're becoming more agile, right? So not as many managers. So let's make those managers, going back to Lorman's law number 4, let's make them into Agile coaches. Oh, well, so he's pretty senior, so his pay grade is pretty high. So he can be just a junior, some person, right? He cannot be a Scrum Master, which is also very wrong, because a senior Scrum Master is a coach and should be highly paid, should be decently paid, I should say. So let's call him a senior Agile coach. And this person is a junior PM. Well, guess what? We're going to give him a slightly lower rank. We're going to call him a Scrum Master. It's a complete, so whoever does this, they really misguide and disservice their own organization. And of course, taking a business analyst and just relabeling them overnight and calling them a product owner will just lead to more dysfunction. So long story short, in large-scale Scrum adoptions, you need to take a look at one of the very untouchable dimensions, one of the very untouchable traditionally, I would say, dimensions, which is HR, human resources. Okay, just a pass-through slide. Probably if you see or hear any of these titles with the word Agile concatenated to it, should raise a flag. There's no point to say Agile Scrum Master, or Agile Product Owner, right? Because that's kind of implied. In Scrum is an Agile framework. And you can read it at your own pace when you have it. Another word of, so this is something that I wanted to talk to you guys about when I was originally discussing, coming and speaking at the meetup. Just be aware of these problems. I refer to the triple taxation problem. And this isn't probably less specific, nor is the following slide, but indirectly this is. And remember, when we talk about less, we talk about a lot. We talk about system dynamics. So we talk about system variable that makes it very much upstream and have impact on downstream system variables. And this is an example. I refer to this as a triple taxation in a company. And of course, the dollar sign means there's money involved. It's almost like if you recall from conventional, traditional project management, the iron triangle of the triple constraint, budget, scope, and timeline. Here, I think it's a constraint in the form of large consultancies, and oftentimes those employ these smaller recruiting agencies. I call them like chop shops, hustlers. They bring in lots of people. Some of them are pretty highly paid, and some of them are very low paid. But these are not real Agile experts. These are just bodies to staff. With that comes lots of attempts to install commercially successful Agile frameworks. And some of them are pretty successful. I mean, financially, they're very successful for whoever has produced them. And of course, I'm not dropping names, but I'm sure you know what I'm alluding to. And of course, tooling companies. So that comes like a trio, right? They usually come like a horse and carriage, and and the person that operates the carriage. So be mindful of those, right? And this isn't something that is supportive or it's really not conducive of agility, of organizational agility. It will actually cost you lots of money. Many companies end up spending millions and millions of dollars on this, and then they realize they haven't changed much. So who are they to blame? Just us. A little more on this front. This is the usual schema we see, and you probably will not see Agile less experts coming through this chain of command. There aren't that many, and less expertise is not going to be. It's hard to. It will be difficult to process people with large-scale expertise to this food chain. I refer to it as a resource processing food chain, going from many people with the word Agile in their title through various tiers of staffing firms and firms helpers, and then going through big consultants on their client. And this may also be very much supported by these. I referred to these as DDTs, deck-driven transformations. This would be quite the opposite of what we want to see with organizations that are trying to become more agile, and less adoptions, given they're very deep and very narrow, take a completely different approach. They're not deck driven. They're very much field experience driven, and they're based on many experiments. We have done more than 600 experiments over the course of a decade. Big consultancies, of course, this comes with very interesting frameworks, and I don't expect you to decipher it at the moment, but you will probably have the cartoon later on. It's an example of something that has gone really wild with trying to adopt this so-called a framework, which is really not a framework, and just relabeling existing organizational structures and domains of control into some of the fancy labels and interesting names. And of course, the middleman problem that I described a few slides back is very serious and very persistent today. And by all means, we recommend steering away from it. This is probably a pass-through slide. You will probably enjoy more of it if you follow this link below when you'll probably be able to see the write-up on some of the ecosystemic problem that we see in the system. We have low quality individuals entering companies in the capacity of agile coaches. It brings down even further the quality of internal coaching expertise, and this leads further into to very low expectations of from people that are actually joining the firm. It's almost like a positive feedback loop, but it's driving quality further and further down. And people that are in charge of organizational efforts internally, organizationally, should be aware of this problem, because if they don't pull a plug in this, they may almost continuously deprecate and depreciate their own quality of their own efforts and bring value even further down. I'm going to say something else just for the sake of, making this very explicit. We do not say no to metrics in less adoptions. We actually are very keen on looking at things that matter. It's like, I think Albert Einstein said once, I think I'm paraphrasing, not everything that you would like to measure can be measured, but not everything that is easily measurable matters. So don't just chase numbers and chase superficial indicators. This is an example of, I call it an agile semifinals race. If you have some maturity levels that are artificially imposed on your teams, and those are also linked to rewards and some other, bad things, then most likely you're going to have a lot of internal competition, intrinsic rivalry that you rather avoid, and it's just going to lead your organization to a halt eventually. So I'm probably going to pause for a minute. I really would like to collect some questions, because with the next part of my discussion, I would like to switch over to the left side itself and use some of the very explicit graphics we have in the repository of graphics there. I will say just one thing before I switch. Organizational design is the first order factor that defines organizational adaptiveness. We said this once. My personal observation is that more and more people today are stating that their organizations, their companies are under stress and under pressure, especially because of COVID problems. And people are almost, people on the risk of losing jobs, people on the risk of being downsized, some people are being left, some people are being asked to leave, unpaid leave because companies do not need as many people. And this just leads to one thought for me. Companies that are overly heavy and very cumbersome in their operations and in org structures are probably more at risk to be dealing with this excessive unnecessary baggage, this heaviness, than companies that are leaner, simpler, and more adaptive. And of course, less by definition is a very lean framework by the way we build our organization. So with less, a company that is probably either less or on its way to adopt large-scale Scrum, it would naturally be not, going through a very dramatic organizational downsizing, but actually taking things more methodically, more gradually, in a healthy way. It's like losing weight by exercising and having right diet, as opposed to going through some unnecessary surgical procedures. So that's just my way of creating an analogy between what organizations might be going through and organizational health. I'm going to pause, Jay and everyone. I would like to take some questions now. While I'm doing this, I would like to switch to another repository where probably I'm going to be leverage some of that as I will be answering questions. So Jay, would you help me, please? Could you take a look at what's in the queue, or should I just take a look myself? Hello? All right.
Yeah, you can look yourself, but there's nothing there right now. So I encourage everyone, if you have a question, let's see, there's 16 people. You know, I can unmute, or you can just send it in via the text, or you can just raise your hand. It's down there at the bottom there where it says reactions. You can click on it. If you let me know.
Yep, yeah, so I'm still sharing, but don't mind what's on the screen. I'll just use it if I need to. So let me open up the floor, folks. Maybe you want to have, I think in my experience, the very first question becomes almost like a primer, and there are more questions following. So
Yeah.
who's going
So Ming, you know, typical question, I think, Ming, and I can open it up and let you talk. But you know, if you have, she has 100+ Scrum teams. So if most Scrum teams are practicing on Scrum, is it appropriate to start any Agile scaling? So I'm going to unmute everyone. So Ming, do you want to add to that?
I'm reading. Thanks.
Nothing specific to add. So
Okay.
yeah.
So let me.
I'm clear on the question.
Yeah. So I think the question is kind of clear to me. So let me open up this diagram, and this is not the left side. This is not from the left side. It's from my website. You said you have 100+ Scrum teams now, and I'm gonna say this with a lot of respect, right? I would, and you probably said it yourself, but if most of the teams are not practicing well in Scrum, so it's easy. It's funny that you say this. 100+ teams are being considered as Scrum teams, but none of them are practicing good Scrum. So to me, it is one of those challenges that we see with organizations trying to chase numbers, and that the pedestal, the first, the second, and third place of more senior managers trying to compete with one another. I've seen this more often than not. Organizations trying to claim numbers of how many Scrum teams they have, or so-called Scrum teams, without really understanding what Scrum means. To many companies, if a company is using Jira, or if a team is using Jira, or if a team goes into daily stand-up, daily Scrum, that automatically means they're using Scrum, which is not a true statement. You know, this could be just a numbers game. And what they actually do is just they're going through very basic motions, like maybe going to 1 or 2 Scrum events does not really mean they're using Scrum. Scrum is very well defined in the Scrum guide, but also I think it's almost, this knowledge is commoditized today. If they're not delivering incrementally at the end of every sprint, something that is tangible and meaningful and useful to business, they're probably not using Scrum. But I was going to say something else here. Like if you look at this if you take a look at this diagram, what you see at the bottom is was probably a healthy Scrum. You have a team that cuts across multiple components and delivers at the end of every sprint something that's potentially shippable. But there are different ways to fake it and call it Scrum. Like this is a more obvious anti-pattern when you have analysis and then design and then a bunch of development phases and then only testing, and only then you deliver something that's potentially shippable. Now you can call these time boxes as sprints, but as we know, these are mini waterfalls, right? Analysis, design, development, these are sequential phases, toll gates. And this one this is also an anti-pattern, but it's not easy to observe. It's not easy to identify from at hello because it looks like each team delivers something at the tail end. But if you think about it, they deliver in components. So each team is not a feature team, it's a component team. So although it may look like they're sprinting, they will have a gazillion number of bugs and integration problems towards the end. And it will take X number of sprints to integrate together. And maybe then, hopefully, they will deliver something shippable. So neither one of these is true Scrum. So if your organization has 100+ teams that are doing their own component-centric work, it's like copy-paste Scrum, we call it, then, of course, yeah, so I guess the question was also, is it right to is it right to apply less for an organization like this? Just because you have 100 teams and God knows how many people does not automatically mean that less could be the right solution for it, for your organization. You need to be able to identify clearly your product or products, multiple products, then maybe you have different, maybe you need to consider less huge with a very widely defined product and multiple requirement areas. You need to revisit your organizational structure, you know, more holistically. You need to do many things that we do at the beginning of the transformation, at the beginning of less adoption. So it isn't just by definition, if you have too many teams, if you have too many people, then we are going to scale. This is precisely, and I mean precisely, what those large commercially successful frameworks are for. You unpack, you install, and you have 100 teams or 1,000 people that will seamlessly fit into that framework, and everyone's going to have a place to be. So it doesn't challenge organizational design whatsoever. It just takes it at its face value. Large-scale Scrum is an organizational design framework that requires to revisit your org charts.
Yeah, so Gene, we got three other questions there if you want to look in the chat room, and you can answer them if you want. And if anyone wants to talk, let me know. I'll unmute everyone. But just I'm going to take a little bit of thunder away from Gene. Unless we really ask people to descale. Go, Gene.
Yep. So descaling, in fact, it was initially mislabeled. I mean, Craig and Boss laugh about this. They make a joke, say, hey, it's called large-scale Scrum, but what we really need to do is we need to descale an organization. The goal is not to scale. Those so-called scaled specialists or, enterprise coaches, I'm not sure why they use the word enterprise anyway. They think by giving magnificent, large, complex solutions, they actually help in organizations. No, they actually hurt organizations. Those unpacking large solutions are harmful. They're very expensive, but they're harmful. It says, how do you, I'm sorry, the Olaf asked the question, how do you propose the system of middleman IT can be changed? So I guess I'm reading this right. So what do you do with we refer to it as a frozen middle, right? So interestingly, right? So the way I say this philosophically is this. If I was a capitalist, if I was a stockholder of a company that was developing a product, I would be very much concerned if I knew that my dividends and my stock price is lower because of the additional unnecessary dysfunction and waste that happens internally. So I want my organization to be efficient. And for that, I want it to be lean. I want it to be systemically optimized. So how do you deal with potential with individuals with roles that are perhaps not required for healthy functioning? And by the way, in large-scale Scrum, we clearly delineate between job security and role security. We say, and we kind of refer to ourselves to a company, you absolutely must do everything you can to protect jobs of your valuable people. So there's a difference between a role security and job security. If you start optimizing for the role, then you're going to be disservicing yourself as a company. You will be doing this at expense of global systemic optimization. What it means is that if you have a business analyst or you have a project manager who is not a true contributor to product development, the question should be asked, well, are you willing to stay? So that's a volunteering thing. Would you be willing to learn new skills? And if the answer is yes, I will be. So maybe that's definitely a good sign. If the answer is, oh, no, that's not what I do. I tell others what to do. I just assign tasks. Well, maybe not in less product group then. You have to find some other place where you could do it. So we definitely do not want to optimize for wrong things. So these people could be great people, but they don't have too much to offer to less product development. So we need to find ways to embrace them elsewhere. So that's really bad middleman. So we don't have managers in LeSS. They're not mandatory, they're not mandated, but if they do exist, their responsibilities, their roles are likely to change. Instead of looking inward and telling people what to do, they look outward for opportunities to improve processes and develop new product opportunities. So that's just not any manager. These are very skilled people, and these are senior people. These are senior managers. So a PMO type of manager would not be necessary in large-scale Scrum. Could be somewhere else within the organization, sure, but not within LeSS. There was another question here. So I'll take the senior. There's one about tips of getting enough time with senior leaders. In my experience, the busy people, of course, they are busy people. Yeah, and the other one was, what do you recommend for the conversation with HR regarding agile teams roles? That was the opinion in most critical role. So I'm going to say this. I wouldn't actually start any conversation with HR. Why? Because HR as an organizational domain, I would consider it as a locally optimized organizational structure. If you think about it hard enough, you realize that many processes and things that HR does and asks other employees to do, they're optimized for their own existence. It's like a PMO. They look for things to do, and guess what? Individual performance appraisals and annual evaluations and all that stuff keeps them super busy. But it has been scientifically and widely proven that the whole process is very flawed. So you can always ask a question: what is exactly that they, what can they trim within their own space to make themselves leaner? But I'm going to answer this in a slightly different way. I would start a conversation with senior managers on product of product groups. I'm sorry, from a product side as well as technology. Excuse me. I would look for those counterparts and those partnerships that are really, really genuinely involved, engaged, intimately involved, and have stakes in a game. By gaining their support and by gaining their not just in spirit, gaining their commitment, I would actually accomplish much more than going directly to HR. Now, by using the above mentioned, then we could leverage HR. And of course, once we get a buy-in, once they soften up to what we're saying, then we can spend plenty of time educating them and teaching them, of course, on multiple fronts. And a lot what to do with what has to do with HR also has to do with individual performances, individual performance appraisals, perks and bonuses, incentives, etc. So for that, we have some specific topics that we need to address, and we only can approach HR when we have senior management support from those other areas that is truly benefited. You wouldn't just start your transformation by going to HR, at least not in my experience. And also there was a question, so regarding agile teams where roles with reduced workforce are being combined. I mean, maybe you can clarify a little bit more, a little bit better what you mean by reduced. Does it mean that fewer people involved? I think it's from Heather.
I unmuted Heather.
Sorry, hold on.
Hey, Heather.
Hi, sorry.
Hi.
Are you still muted?
I can hear you. We can hear
You
you.
can hear me. Okay. Yes. Fewer people involved than what we have had in the past. So team sizes are changing.
Well, I mean, change in size versus small teams, it's not the same. I'm all in favor of smaller teams with people being more cross-functional and cross-domain experts. It's probably not the same as constantly changing composition. That the question is more of why is it happening? Do you have a matrix organization?
That's a good question.
Yeah, if you have a matrix organization with people reporting in their within their respective silos, developers only, QA only, then most likely you borrow people for projects which, as we know, are fake wrappers to true product development. And you might be experiencing those things. So, of course, in large-scale Scrum, just like in Scrum, and I think if I didn't mention at the beginning, I should. Large-scale Scrum is Scrum, done by multiple teams working on the same product for the same product owner out of the same backlog. Then there it is very critical to make sure that lost my train of thought, that we all fully dedicated and long living, right? So you can't have a team that is together for 2 months or 2 weeks and then you know, break them up and then rebuild the team. That just defeats the whole purpose of being a team. And also you had there, what's the opinion is most critical role to keep a team productive? I mean, just like in Scrum, the role of Scrum Master is super critical, and the role of product owner is super critical, and the role of developer is super critical. Those 3 roles are super critical. Now, if they are not being respected, or if they're not being supported properly, organization, then of course many other things will suffer. So like I mentioned before, you need a career path. You need a strong support for people that are in these key roles. You can't just take a project manager and relabel them overnight into a Scrum Master and say, well, go ahead and Scrum this team. We're talking about basic Scrum, just one team Scrum. And in no way, shape, or form will you be able to, as this person, expect from this person to help you with less adoption. Now, I don't want to make it sound horrible, oh my God, but in all fairness, you know, first of all, less adoptions are not meant to be widespread and, you know, super popular as you may see other frameworks, because there is no marketing of less. There is no marketing department by a less company. There is no promise of a sacred land when we start adapting less. We leverage what we know. We leverage many, many years of experiments and experiences, but we do not promise, we don't promise miracles. In fact, we do go on the record, and we're very explicit from the beginning that, hey, in order to improve, you may have to change some of the existing dynamics of your organization. And oftentimes what we hear back from people, oh, no, that's not something we're gonna do. We can't change anything. Just let's do Agile on top of what we're already doing today. Can we not change anything what we're doing today? And if that's the attitude, of course, chances of succeeding with large-scale Scrum adoption are slim to none. But as we see, so it's almost like if you cannot do it in a natural way, if you don't want to do it in a natural way, you may end up looking into this because of, I don't say a mandate, but because of a necessity, right? Look at what's happening out there now. There's so many people, so many companies are questioning now, do we really need so many people being in so many different locations remotely with so many translation layers and so many commanding lines? So I hate to say this, right? We obviously don't want to write on bad news and on bad a bad situation we're all in, but survival of the fittest may kick in here. Right, so companies that are more lean, more adaptive, more nimble, will end up being more resilient to what's happening in the world at the moment. So, there was a question from Tim. Hopefully, Heather, was somewhere useful.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Sure, and Tim, there was any tips of getting enough time with senior leaders. So, first of all, I'm going to make this. I do actually delineate between being a leader and being a manager. In my experience, majority of people out there that are highly paid are managers, they're not leaders. Very few true leaders out there. But even though some of them could be leaders, right? So what do you bet on? You bet on the state of urgency. In my experience, the best results we could achieve with people that cannot any longer remain complacent in the situation they're in. So if you are up against someone who just wants to do Agile because their next door neighbor did it, or because there is an organizational, or organizational challenge, who's going to be more Agile by the end of 2020? You want to steer away from that manager as far as you can. You're going to end up with the the first, the second, the third place pedestal blocks cartoon competition that I was describing a few slides before, because they will not be truly supportive. They'll be playing the game, checking the boxes, and quite frankly, just waiting for their turn, for their cycle to come. And oftentimes these managers just move on and do something else, and they leave, they leave behind stuff that needs to be fixed. And I've seen quite a few of those managers, some senior architects moving on from one role onto another, from actually leaving the company, going elsewhere, and leaving their prior employer in not such great conditions. So you definitely want to steer away from those. But if you get a hold of a real person, a real, real leader, well, I'm a senior manager who really cares, I would approach this from the angle of, well, first of all, I would approach it from the angle, what isn't working today? So don't just tell them some great solutions about less, unless you are really gearing it towards what are you trying to fix. In fact, in my experience at least, it's never a good idea to lead off with terminology, and especially if it's overloaded terminology, and hey, let's do less because I am so great at, I read this great book. I prefer doing things implicitly as opposed to explicitly. So you can probably lead up, you can lead to a point where she or he, a manager, becomes so interested and so excited with the idea, you're ready to disclaim what it really is, right? Oh, by the way, what we're doing is called large-scale Scrum. But I would definitely look for people that are eager to change, and they're uncomfortable with the position they're in today. So I would look for problem children, right? And try to help those. That's just my approach. And of course, they're all busy, right? So look for those that are busy, but also are not happy with what they have. And we want to work backwards from a problem. In large-scale Scrum training, and also both in training as well as in 3-day training and 1-day training, we leverage a lot causal loop diagrams, what's called system modeling techniques. So what we do with those, we kind of help individuals build their own organizational system and see some of these problems firsthand. So we recommend using this technique with senior managers. Take them through to a whiteboard and do like a system modeling exercise real quickly, so they can show, they can see themselves a cause and effect between a problem, upstream problem, and downstream manifestation of that problem. So yeah, some of you, I'll share some of my causal loop diagrams if you would like separately, so you can use. So that kind of exhausts what we have on the list. Anything else, folks? Anything else you would like to ask, raise, comment? Jay, seems like people are, there are no more questions. What would you prefer we do next? Go to...
It's up to you. Do you want to actually go into less a little bit more and talk about the details there and the kind of the unique differences in having one product backlog and less huge and all that stuff? Because there's some very unique differences in less than some of the other frameworks.
Sure, we can do some of that. Let me, I'm still sharing, so let me take a quick look at what's most relevant here. Well, we were referring to the history of less, right? So I just want to show this little graphic here to help you understand that we have core principles of less. The three that I mentioned about less adoption, but there are also additional less principles that drive, help us drive less adoption. On top of it, we have two frameworks, less and less huge. Sometimes we refer to those as rules, less rules. Above, we have less guides, and we have those also well documented. And last but not least, on the outer periphery, outer periphery, we have experiments, 600 plus experiments that we have thoroughly documented over more than a decade. So interestingly, less wasn't created as a commercial framework. It has more than a decade of a track record. The first book was written in 2008. And then the second was in 2010, and only the third one in 2015. So we're talking about the body of knowledge that has been collected from the industry over many years. And that's probably what makes less very unique and very different from many other framework you may know, because those came to the market very reactively because, hey, there's a demand for business. There was a great opportunity to scale. So let's do something. Less wasn't like that. What else? This is an interesting one, right? First, let me stress the point I was making before. In large-scale Scrum, Scrum Master is an absolutely full-time role, and he or she is able to support up to 3 teams. So depending on complexity of work and depending on maturity of your last product group, this could go from 1 to 3 teams for one person. And since we have up to 8 teams and less working together concurrently, we are talking about roughly up to 3 Scrum Masters supporting this at a minimum. You can have more, like if you have a very complex product and one Scrum Master supports no more than 2 teams, then you may end up with 4 Scrum Masters or more. Okay, but these are very senior folks. And over time, of course, their focus will change from product ownership and teams onto development practices in the organization. You notice something here also, organizational focus is pretty high at the beginning. It's when we create organizational blueprint and prior to flipping a switch and going into last mode. And those are the 2-3 months that we have been, those are the 2-3 months that I mentioned before that are required to prepare your product group to start sprinting. Okay, that's something I was referring to as bottom up and top down, right? One of the 3 principles of less adoption. Managers down below supporting, giving capabilities to teams and individuals that are in direct contact with users. Okay. In large-scale Scrum, so I'm going to show some of these slides just in a minute. In large-scale Scrum, we also, let me see that, where was that slide? That very descriptive. In large-scale Scrum, we very strongly stress the notion there's a difference between prioritization and clarification. How do you think a single product owner may support up to 8 teams? These are all the relationships that a product owner has. These are up to 8 teams. Well, here's how. Prioritization goes this way, but clarification, as much as possible, we recommend going directly from teams to customers and backwards, between customers and teams. And that's how you give a person his or her life back. A product owner isn't a Jira manager or Jira administrator or someone who is responsible for creating all of the stories in the backlog. So that's very critical to understand. That's why we have only one product owner and not multiple product owners, because that just creates a lot of fractalism. And you don't want to have one team per product owner relationship. It is almost a guarantee that you will end up having a BA of some sort, playing the role of a surrogate, playing the role of a quasi product owner without really any empowerment or any any rights to set priorities. So you don't want to have a 1-to-1 ratio. That's why we have up to 8 ratio. Speaking of which, if you look at the big picture of LeSS, let me open up this one, you will see what I'm referring to. Each one of these tracks, and you may have up to 8 of those, is a team sprinting, right? So some of the events are shared and some of the events are team specific. Now, there's only one product owner. There are no 2, no 3, no 5. The entire LeSS product group is supported by one product owner because they all work for the same potential shippable product increment. What's worth mentioning is this, in large scale Scrum, so let me fire up this one. We spend a lot of time discussing what's called local optimization. And we cover this a lot in training because we are, as LeSS practitioners and as LeSS experts, we have to be able to see and hear local optimization everywhere. And by the way, this is actually one of the most painful elements of understanding LeSS. Once you see, it's impossible for you to unsee it. One of the local optimizations the classic one that we expose in LeSS is component teams versus feature teams, when we have a component versus feature team discussion. Here's an example of 3 component teams working out of the same backlog for the same product owner, but look, each team works on their own individual component. Lots of integration points, lots of silos. Team C cannot work on anything but item number 4 because that's the only thing they know how to do. They'll be very local optimized to do an amazing job in the component C, but that could be a very low priority on the list of the product owner. So this is local optimization at its worst. Here's an example of a feature team. That's what we want in LeSS, where each team works on a component that is complementary. So each team can work on up to 3 components. And of course, they are out of the same backlog, but look at this, they work in order of priority for the same product owner. So if I was a product owner, from my perspective, each team works on the highest priority item. So that's the biggest advantage of working the feature-centric way. And of course, we do a deeper dive. So we use system modeling. We use causal diagrams in training, and also we recommend using them in your discussions with senior managers when you explain to them some of the malfunctions of the component-centric organizational design. So these are just graphics, right? But behind these graphics, there are many conversations, there are many stories, and those stories are best supported by system modeling and system modeling exercises that we encourage people to learn and leverage in their day-to-day routine.
This is Jay. I'll interrupt one more time. So out there in this website that Gene is going through, there's also many, many case studies. So if you're asking yourself, wow, how is this really implemented? I mean, what are some of the experiences people have making this happen? Because that last slide, about feature teams and reorganization, everything, that's significant. That's a major change to many, many companies and organizations, and it's not easy. But there's case studies out there where we've done it. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yep, and I'm showing this page, and of course it's right off the top. It's important enough to be at the very top of the navigation menu. Case studies, lots of fintech examples, financial investment banks, insurance companies, telecom, some product companies, you name it. So I would say it's some pharmaceuticals as well, I believe. So it's a good gamut of industries. In the previous in the previous class last week, someone was very specific in their needs towards the end. They said, look, this is great stuff that I learned. There's so many aha moments for me, but how do I actually cherry pick things on my own? How do I do a deeper dive into the subject matter and understand how things were done? And is there a best practice? So I immediately stopped that person and said, first of all, there's no such thing as best practice, because everything is very conditional, very circumstantial. You can take Antarctica Investment Bank, and by the way, some of these names are facetious because people that wrote them do not necessarily want to go through the very challenging process of getting organizational companies approval. So, but you have to take it as face value. So this is in fintech. This is a fintech. This is a large Dutch bank. This is actually very explicit, right? This is the bank. This is the bank. There's a plenty in fintech, right? So I told them, look, you got at least 6 case studies to study. And you can look at some of the, so in each case study, there are experiments that have been used. Some of them are failures, some of them are successes. And understand why each one was either a failure or success. And learn from mistakes. These are not sponsored case studies by large consultancies that will talk only about greatness. They will talk about stuff that did not work. These are very authentic, very original. That's what makes them, I think, is so much more powerful than, some large consultancies put great, decks on their sites and they're proud of those. Okay. So I would link many of the conversations we're having to what has been practically implemented.
So Gene, we're at 1:31.
Yep.
Do you want to end it here or talk some more?
Yeah, you know what? I think I've said it plenty. I'm going to say just this. So first of all, I want to thank you. And by the way, let's use the last 30 minutes, whichever you would like. I want to say thank you for you guys for joining and some of the questions you've posed. I'm very transparent, very easy to access, and very easy to connect with. So if you have any questions, maybe you did not feel comfortable on the call but want to ask privately, I'm happy to, if you reach out, drop me a note, ask me. I'm happy to share what I know. I do teach almost every week. If you would like to consider one of these, I'm going to share them with you as well. There was hours every day. The following week, you don't have to. If you're a self-starter, self-learner, you just can leverage so much there is. Oh, I was muted.
Well, you're not. I unmuted you quickly. Sorry.
Okay, no worries, no worries. Yeah, so you can always go to Les.Work site, and there's a gazillion of data. On my side as well, there's a lot of references back to the LessWorks, as well as some other original, authentic content. So, yeah, Jay, I'm going to be able to. I'll be happy to wrap up at this point, and I'll give it back to you. And
All right.
again,
Well, thank you.
I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gene. And Gene's very accessible, like he said. I'll send this out, the recording as well as the deck, to everyone, and make sure it's in our system so that we can access it. Also, I would like to open it up now. We're going to end here in the next 10 or 15 minutes. But if anyone has any questions in general, it doesn't have to be about Agile. One of the things we're thinking of doing going forward for these meetups is to have an Ask the Agile coach, 20 minutes or 30 minutes into the meetup, or after, at the end, kind of like, just open it up and it has some questions or any statements or anything like that people want to make. So this is an experiment. So I'm going to open it up to if you have any questions. It doesn't have to be about Les. About anything in the Agile world, or any other opportunities you would like to provide information to us, I now open it up.
I was going to say, if no one else has any questions, I would love, Gene, to hear about your journey to the CEC.
Oh, interesting. Definitely complimentary, right? Yeah. So let me. Sure, I'm happy to give you some intel about my own journey. So, my first attempt to gain this accreditation, to gain the certificate. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me, slip of my tongue. It's a Freudian slip. It's not a certificate to me. It's a record. It's a badge of recognition. It was back in 2010. At that time, I was, I was a part of Scrum Alliance community. I did a bunch of things in the space of whole agile space, coaching, training, but I was never so much in pursuit of that title. And I did give it a shot. It didn't work out. It didn't work out for two reasons. First, I did not take it seriously, and my approach to the thesis, it was not just a multiple choice, right? It wasn't up to par. That's one. The second one, the process itself was not up to par. That's two. There was like a black box, black hole. You submit your application and you hear back in 3-4 months, maybe yes, maybe no, and maybe they'll give you an explanation. So it wasn't it wasn't good. And the third, so those are the two major ones. And by the way, the way I wrote, the way I write, sometimes is very assertive. It wasn't the right way to write. So there was those three in combination. It was okay. I mean, I did I had my lesson learned and I went back. So in a few years, about 3 years went by, I think I reapplied again. At that time, there was a beta program in place, and the two respected gentlemen from the Scrum Alliance community, Pete Barons and Roger Brown, maybe you know them by names, they have revamped the process. And instead of having just a one big batch, a black box type of, you submit and you don't know what happens to it, it has become a two-phase process, quantitative and qualitative. And actually, I was the very first guinea pig that got through that beta process. I recall it was back in 2014 and 2015. I was number 65. Back then it was like up to that many people. So that was it. So it was never an ultimate goal for me to become a certified enterprise coach. In fact, back then it was called certified Scrum coach because, I guess because of certified Scrum trainer, certified Scrum Alliance, was certified Scrum coach. But then they changed the title. When I was going through, it was already called certified enterprise coach because, quite frankly, we focus on the entire enterprise. That's why it's a bit of my personal, I guess, I'm pretty skeptical with roles and terminology that's thrown out there. Everyone, their mother is an enterprise coach on LinkedIn. You actually have to validate yourself. Even the team coach, you have to validate. I was one of the people that co-created certified team coach program on the basis of certified enterprise coach. And it was never meant to be a junior program. These are very, very high, very demanding role. Both processes are very highly demanding. Neither one of them is a junior thing, and just slightly different focus, right? I would say significantly different focus, but pretty senior. So anyway, and when I see those titles out there, I say like, really, there's no litmus test for you. But if there was, you would disqualify yourself. That was my journey. I mean, I think one of the big things that we expect from enterprise and team coaches is to be visible and known in the community. And this is where you can challenge others and be challenged yourself. And if you don't put yourself through this boot camp, we will look skeptically at what you say, because if you claim I've done all these great things within an organization without being publicly exposed, how do we know? I mean, and also it kind of tells you, right? So you have a senior PMO leader now becoming, I've been doing this for all my life. Now I'm going to call myself a coach. Yeah, it kind of shows. I mean, we know who's who, but personally, me, it was a great journey and a great way to validate myself. I did a huge amount of learning myself when I went through the process, because you start identifying these gaps and oh my God, I need to go fill it back in. Yeah. So hopefully that answers.
It does. The reason I'm asking is I recently finished my CTC and was able to get that, and I would mirror the journey part. I think I started my CTC, got enough in it with a few mentors to realize how much I needed to learn, paused it long enough to do, enough classes to work on my ICF certification. And now, then once I got that, then I turned back on to my CTC in order to get through it. So.
Yeah, I would echo what you said. It's not so many people, quite a few people actually attend to this opportunity to get certified as, well, this is once I become a CTC or CC, and I'm going to have a permission to coach. That's such a wrong approach, because in fact, many companies still today do not know what this title entails. I mean, Scrum Alliance has become better at making the world aware of their own people, but back a few years ago, it wasn't the case. So I agree with you. To me, what the biggest aspiration was to learn so much.